The massive crystalline dome of the Galactic Council stretched endlessly above, its surface pulsing with the dying light of 1,000 worlds. Captain Minho adjusted his simple black uniform and tried not to stare at the incredible sight before him. Ancient beings from across the galaxy filled the enormous chamber, some floating in energy bubbles, others towering like living mountains, and a few that seemed to be made of pure starlight itself. Elder Vextar of the Zephyrians stood at the center podium, his crystal body crackling with nervous energy. The old alien looked like a walking diamond, but Minho could see cracks running through his translucent form, literal cracks that seemed to spread with each word he spoke. "Brothers and sisters of the galaxy," Vextar's voice rang out like shattering. "Ice, our greatest minds have finished their calculations. The Void Swarm has destroyed 73% of all inhabited star systems. At their current rate of expansion, complete galactic extinction will occur in exactly 12 cycles." A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Minho felt Lieutenant Yunji shift nervously beside him as they watched beings older than human civilization itself break down in despair. The Collective, a race that shared one massive hive mind across billions of bodies, began buzzing with panic so intense that the sound made Minho's teeth ache. Nearby, the ethereals started flickering like candles in a storm, their energy forms becoming so dim he could barely see them. "Show them the latest reports," demanded General Thrak of the Goronian Empire, his 4 massive arms gesturing angrily. The bear-like alien's fur had turned completely white with stress, and his red eyes burned with frustration. Holographic displays materialized above the assembly, showing the galaxy as a 3-dimensional map. What Minho saw made his blood run cold. Vast sections of the galactic spiral arms were simply gone, not destroyed but completely empty. Where billions of stars once shone, only perfect blackness remained. "The Kepler sector, gone," announced Dr. Zilara, a snake-like being whose scales shifted color with emotion. Right now, those scales were a sickly gray-green. "The Vega cluster, consumed. The entire Orion trade route, nothing but void." Minho watched the recordings of the attacks. The Void Swarm moved unlike anything he'd ever seen. Massive black shapes that seemed to eat light itself, surrounded by smaller mechanical drones that stripped entire planets down to their cores in minutes. When they finished with a system, they left behind perfect spheres of absolute nothingness, as if reality itself had been deleted. "We tried everything," croaked Elder Mephisto of the Toad Worlds, his bulbous eyes weeping purple tears. "Our plasma cannons barely scratched them. Our quantum torpedoes passed right through them. Even our reality-warping weapons had no effect." Commander Zilla of the Insectoid Confederacy clicked her mandibles in agreement. "My fleets threw themselves at the swarm for 3 full rotations. We lost 800 vessels and didn't destroy a single enemy unit. They adapt faster than we can innovate." The chamber filled with the sounds of despair. Aliens wailing in frequencies that hurt Minho's ears, others communicating through color changes and pheromone releases that his human senses couldn't fully interpret. But the message was clear. They had given up. "Perhaps," wheezed the ancient turtle being whose name was unpronounceable in human speech, "it is time to discuss evacuation protocols to the Andromeda Galaxy." Minho felt his jaw clench. These beings had ruled the stars since before humans, had discovered fire, commanded technologies that seemed like magic, and possessed knowledge accumulated over millions of years. Yet here they sat, talking about running away. Lieutenant Yunji leaned close and whispered, "Sir, did you see those battle recordings? The swarm doesn't just destroy ships. It learns from every attack. Each time the aliens tried a new weapon, the swarm figured out how to counter it within minutes." Minho nodded, studying the tactical displays that showed the aliens' failed strategies. Every attack had been perfectly coordinated, mathematically precise, and tactically flawless, and every single one had failed completely. "The evacuation? Ships will need to launch within 6 cycles, Elder Vextar continued. His crystal form now shot through with so many cracks, he looked ready to shatter. "We must preserve what knowledge we can, and hope the Void Swarm cannot follow us between galaxies." That's when Minho noticed something the aliens had missed. In all their recordings, Their attacks followed perfect patterns, geometric formations, synchronized timing, predictable tactical progressions. The swarm had learned to counter organized logical warfare, but humans had never been accused of being too logical. As the great powers of the galaxy debated which worlds to abandon first, Captain Minho began to smile for the first time since arriving at this cosmic funeral. Maybe, just maybe, humanity's greatest weakness could become the galaxy's greatest strength. The massive docking bay of the Galactic Council station shook as the human battleship Soul's Pride powered down its engines. Admiral Jae-sung stepped off the transport shuttle, his weathered face taking in the incredible sight around him. Alien vessels of every imaginable design filled the hangar. Ships that looked like living creatures, others made of pure crystal, and some that seemed to bend space around them. Dr. Yun-hai followed close behind, clutching her data tablet like a lifeline. She'd spent the entire 3-day journey analyzing everything humanity knew about the Void Swarm, which honestly wasn't much. Commander So-min walked beside them, her hand resting casually on her sidearm, a habit from too many dangerous missions. "Look at them staring," So-min muttered under her breath. Alien delegates lined the walkways, their various eyes, sensors, and optical organs focused on the human delegation. Some whispered in languages that sounded like music. Others communicated through flashing lights or color changes. A floating jellyfish-like creature drifted past, its translator crackling with static. Such primitive beings, their ships still use chemical propulsion for maneuvering. Admiral Jae-sung ignored the comment, but Yun-hai noticed his jaw tighten slightly. The human ships were crude compared to the alien vessels around them, but they'd gotten the job done for humanity's rapid expansion into space. The strategy chamber was even more intimidating than Captain Minho had described. Ancient beings who had ruled the stars for eons sat around a circular table that seemed to be carved from a single massive asteroid. Holographic displays showed the current galactic situation, vast empty zones where the Void Swarm had passed, leaving nothing behind. Elder Vextar's crystalline form dominated one end of the table, his body now so cracked with stress that light leaked through the gaps. "Other humans have arrived," he said, his voice carrying about as much enthusiasm as someone announcing a minor equipment malfunction. "Please take your seats. Though I'm not sure what assistance a species barely 2 centuries into space travel can provide," General Thrax's 4 massive arms gestured dismissively. "My fleets have been fighting for 40 standard years. What could these newcomers possibly know that we don't?" Admiral Jae-sung walked to the center of the chamber, his simple uniform looking almost comical next to the flowing robes and energy fields of the aliens around him. "We've been studying your battle records," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "Every single engagement follows the same pattern." "Naturally," sniffed Commander Zilla, her insectoid features clicking with annoyance. "We use proven military doctrine developed over millennia." "So that's exactly why you're losing," Jae-sung replied bluntly. The chamber fell silent. Dr. Yun-hee felt her heart racing as hundreds of alien eyes focused on their small group. Some of these beings could probably destroy Earth with a thought, and here they were criticizing their military strategies. "Explain," rumbled the ancient turtle being, his massive shell shifting as he leaned forward. Jae-sung activated his own data display, showing simplified versions of the alien battle records. "Look at this. The Zephyrian attack on the Proxima. Swarm cluster. Perfect diamond formation, synchronized energy discharge, mathematically optimal targeting solutions. Beautiful to watch. And completely ineffective," added Commander So-min, stepping forward. Her scarred hands moved as she spoke, gestures learned from years of explaining tactics to younger officers. "The swarm adapted to your formation in under 3 minutes. By minute 5, they were predicting your targeting patterns. By minute 10, they were using your own coordination against you." Elder Vextar's crystal form shifted, light refracting through his cracks in new patterns. "Young human, we have fought this enemy for decades. Our combined intellect spans millions of years of warfare experience. Our tactical computers can process—" "Exactly," So-min interrupted, her voice sharp with excitement. "You think too much. You plan too perfectly. These Void Swarm things are machines, right? They process data, analyze patterns, predict outcomes based on logical progression." Dr. Yun-hai felt the moment arriving and stepped forward, her scientist's mind racing. But what if we gave them something they can't process? Something that doesn't follow logical patterns? The chamber erupted in confused murmurs, alien voices mixing in a cacophony of different languages and communication methods. The collective's hive mind buzzed so loudly that several delegates covered their auditory organs. "Impossible," declared Dr. Zilara, her scales shifting to a skeptical blue-black. "All combat follows mathematical principles. Physics cannot be ignored." "We're not talking about ignoring physics," Yunhai replied, her voice growing stronger as she hit her stride. "We're talking about chaos theory, pure, beautiful mathematical chaos. Not random. Humans aren't random. We're unpredictable. There's a crucial difference." She activated her tablet, projecting human battle simulations into the chamber. The aliens watched in confusion as human fighters weaved through space in patterns that seemed to make no sense. Ships spinning while firing, pilots making decisions that contradicted their own previous actions. Formations that looked more like abstract art than military tactics. "Your computers can predict logical responses," Jae-sung explained. "But can they predict a pilot who decides to ram his fighter into an enemy ship while screaming an ancient war song? Can they calculate the trajectory of a captain who makes targeting decisions based on lucky numbers?" General Thrak's red eyes narrowed. "That sounds like madness." Commander So-min grinned, her scars pulling at her weathered face. "Now you're getting it. Controlled madness, organized chaos, we call it being human." The ancient beings around the table exchanged glances, some skeptical, others thoughtful. The ethereals flickered brighter for the first time in days, while the collective's buzzing took on a different tone, almost curious. Elder Vextar studied the human tactical displays, his cracked form reflecting the data in prismatic patterns. For decades, they had thrown their most sophisticated strategies against the Void Swarm and failed. Perhaps it was time to try something completely different. Perhaps it was time to try something human. The old crystal being looked at Admiral Jae-sung with something approaching respect. "Show us," he said simply. "Show us this chaos of yours, Captain." Tae-hyun's fighter shuddered as he pushed the engines beyond their recommended limits, diving toward the Void Swarm formation that hung like a cancer in the Rigel system. Through his cockpit window he could see the enemy, massive black shapes that seemed to absorb light itself, surrounded by thousands of smaller mechanical drones that moved with perfect precision. "Ghost Squadron, this is your captain speaking," Tae-hyun said into his comm, trying to keep his voice steady. "Today we're going to do something that's never been tried before. We're going to fight like humans." Behind him, 11 other modified fighters followed in what could generously be called a formation. Lieutenant Sung-ho's ship had lucky dice. Hanging from his control panel, Pilot Ji-won had painted a cartoon rabbit on her nose cone. Sergeant Hae-won's fighter was covered in symbols from her grandmother's old prayers. Admiral Jae-sung's voice crackled through the comm from the command ship, Seoul's Pride. "Remember, pilots, no formation flying, no predictable patterns. Trust your instincts and fly like you're completely insane." "Roger that, Admiral," Tae-hyun grinned, his hands dancing over the controls. "Insane is what we do best." The Galactic Council's observation fleet hung back at a safe distance, their advanced sensors recording everything. Elder Vextar's crystalline form flickered with nervous energy as he watched the tiny human ships approach the swarm formation that had destroyed entire alien battle groups. "This is madness," whispered General Thrak, his 4 arms gripping his command chair. 12 primitive fighters against a formation that consumed my entire 7th Fleet. Dr. Yunhai stood beside Commander So-min on the human command bridge, her tablet showing readings that made no tactical sense. "The swarm is already adapting," she reported. "Their formation is shifting to counter-standard fighter attack patterns." "Good. Thing we're not using standard patterns," So-min replied, her scarred face splitting into a wild grin. The attack began like nothing the galaxy had ever witnessed. Instead of the precise diamond formations favored by alien militaries, the human fighters scattered in every direction like startled birds. Tae-hyun dove straight down while spinning his ship like a corkscrew, firing his pulse cannons at targets that weren't even in his line of sight. "Yahoo!" Sergeant Hae-won's voice echoed over the comm as she flew her fighter backwards, firing over her shoulder while barrel rolling through a debris field. She was singing at the top of her lungs, an old drinking song her unit used to belt out after particularly dangerous missions. Lieutenant Dongmin decided to fly his ship in figure eights, targeting swarm drones with weapons that his computer insisted were tactically irrelevant. But somehow, his random shots were hitting critical systems, causing explosions that rippled through the enemy formation. The Void Swarm's response was immediate and terrifying. Mechanical tentacles lashed out from the main ships, trying to grab the human fighters with movements calculated to intercept standard evasive maneuvers. But the humans weren't following any standard maneuvers. Pilot Ji-won found herself face-to-face with a swarm drone the size of a building. Instead of fleeing or engaging in standard combat protocols, she did something completely unexpected. She turned off her weapons and started flying loops around the drone while humming her favorite song. The mechanical creature's sensors overloaded, trying to predict her next move. "Target the big ugly one in the center," Tae-hyun shouted, diving toward a swarm ship that looked like a metal spider crossed with a black hole. But instead of approaching from the tactically sound angle, he came in sideways, upside down, while firing his missiles in a pattern that spelled out his girlfriend's name in space. The Void Swarm's adaptive algorithms, designed to counter millions of years of logical military doctrine, began to smoke and spark. Their mechanical brains couldn't process what they were seeing. Every time they predicted a human fighter's next move, the pilot would do something completely different. Not random, but following some incomprehensible human logic. Commander So-min watched from the command ship as impossible readings flooded her screens. Swarm units that had maintained perfect formation for decades were starting to drift apart, their coordination breaking down as their central processing systems overloaded. "Admiral," she called out, her voice filled with amazement. "The swarm formation is collapsing. They're actually falling back." On the alien observation ships, silence reigned. Elder Vextar's crystalline body had stopped flickering entirely. General Thrax's four mouths hung open in shock. The collective's hive mind had gone completely quiet for the first time in recorded history. Sergeant Haewon's fighter emerged from the heart of the swarm formation, her ship covered in scorch marks but still intact. "Did you see that?" she laughed. "Over the comm. I think I made one of those big metal spiders dizzy." The battle lasted only 18 minutes. When the smoke cleared, the Void Swarm formation that had terrorized this sector for months was in complete disarray. Some units fled deeper into space. Others simply shut down as their processing systems gave up trying to understand human tactics. Tae-hyun's squadron regrouped, their ships battered but victorious. "Ghost Squadron to command," he reported, still hardly believing it himself. "Target neutralized. The swarm is retreating." Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. Ancient civilizations that had ruled the stars for eons received the transmission with disbelief, wonder, and for the first time in decades, hope. The humans had done the impossible. The communication arrays across the galaxy buzzed with activity, as news of humanity's victory at Rigel spread like wildfire. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had accepted defeat just days before suddenly found themselves daring to hope again. Admiral Jae-sung stood in the massive war room aboard the Soul's Pride, surrounded by holographic displays showing fleet positions across 3 spiral arms. "Admiral," called out Communications Officer Park, her voice crackling with excitement, "we're receiving requests for joint operations from 47 different species. The Zephyrians want to attach their crystal fighters to our squadrons. The Garonians are offering their heavy cruisers. Even the Ethereals are volunteering their energy-based vessels." Jae-sung rubbed his tired eyes. 3 days ago, these same aliens had barely acknowledged humanity's existence. Now they wanted to learn human tactics that went against millions of years of military tradition. Dr. Hyun-hee looked up from her workstation, surrounded by floating alien scientists who hung on her every word. A collective drone mind hovered nearby, its mechanical voice struggling with concepts that had no translation in their hive language. "Doctor." "Human Hyun-hee," the drone buzzed. "We do not comprehend this gut instinct phenomenon. Our collective consciousness processes all data logically. How does one make tactical decisions based on feelings? Yunhai sighed, trying to find words that could bridge the gap between human intuition and alien logic. Look, it's not about being random or ignoring data. When a human pilot sees an enemy formation, part of their brain processes the tactical information, but another part, the human part, notices things that computers miss. Maybe the way the enemy ships are positioned reminds them of a chess game they lost as a child, so they try an unexpected counter-move. A crystalline Zephyrian scientist flickered with confusion. This makes no mathematical sense. How can childhood memories influence combat effectiveness? That's exactly the point, Yunhai replied, pulling up footage from the Rigel battle. Sergeant Haewon won her engagement, not because she calculated the optimal approach angle, but because flying backwards while singing reminded her of being happy. That emotional state made her unpredictable in ways no tactical computer could anticipate. Meanwhile, Captain Minho was having his own challenges preparing for the assault on the Andromeda Relay. The massive space station served as the galaxy's primary trade hub, but a void swarm cluster had established itself in the surrounding asteroid field, cutting off supply lines to entire sectors. His mixed squadron looked like something from a child's toy collection, sleek human fighters flying alongside crystalline Zephyrian vessels, massive Garonian battle cruisers, and the shifting energy, forms of ethereal combat units. The problem was getting them all to fight like humans. Squadron leaders, this is Minho, he announced over the comm. Remember, we're not following standard attack patterns. When we hit that swarm cluster, I want you to trust your instincts, not your computers. Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian crystal ships immediately protested, his translated voice tight with concern. Captain Minho, our tactical systems have achieved optimal efficiency over centuries. To ignore them seems dangerous. Dangerous is exactly what we want, laughed Pilot Kyung-soo from his position leading the advanced scouts. The swarm expects dangerous. It's prepared for dangerous. What it's not ready for is stupidly dangerous. The alien pilots struggled with these concepts as they approached the Andromeda Relay. Lieutenant Yoonji found herself trying to teach a Garonian heavy cruiser captain how to wing it, a phrase that required 20 minutes of explanation and still left the bear-like alien looking confused. The void swarm cluster around the relay was massive, hundreds of the black light-eating ships arranged in perfect geometric formations, their smaller drone escorts moving in synchronized patterns that had destroyed dozens of alien fleets. All units, this is Minho, the captain announced as they entered weapons range. Execute Operation Complete Nonsense. What followed defied every principle of space warfare ever developed. Kyung-soo led 3 Zephyrian crystal ships in what appeared to be a suicidal dive straight toward the swarm's central command vessel, spinning and weaving in patterns that made the alien pilots airsick just watching. Trust the process, Kyung-soo shouted over the comm as swarm tentacles lashed out to intercept his formation. Sometimes the worst plan is the best plan. The Zephyrian pilots, their logical minds screaming in protest, followed the human fighter into what looked like certain death. But Kyung-soo's seemingly random flight path took them through gaps in the swarm's defenses that shouldn't have existed, gaps created by the enemy's own attempts to predict his movements. Lieutenant Yoonji found herself flying, alongside a massive Garonian cruiser whose captain had finally embraced the human concept of making stuff up as you go. The huge bear-like alien was actually laughing as he fired his ship's main guns at targets his tactical computer insisted were worthless, causing chain reactions that rippled through the enemy formation. "This is impossible," roared General Thrak. Over the comm, his forearms working his ship's controls with newfound enthusiasm. "My targeting systems say I should be dead by now, but these swarm ships keep missing me." Dr. Yunhai monitored the battle from the command ship, her instruments, showing readings that made no tactical sense. Swarm units that had maintained perfect coordination for decades were colliding with each other as their prediction algorithms overloaded, trying to process the chaos. An ethereal energy being flickered with excitement as it phased through a void swarm vessel, disrupting its systems from the inside. "The joy emotion makes combat more effective," it announced in its musical voice. We had forgotten the pleasure of battle. The engagement lasted 43 minutes. When it ended, The massive swarm cluster was scattered across 3 star systems, their formations broken, and their adaptive systems crashed from overload. The Andromeda relay was free, and supply lines across the galaxy reopened. Admiral Jae Sung smiled as victory reports flooded in from across the combat zone. For the first time since the war began, they weren't just surviving the Void Swarm's attacks, they were winning. The heart of the galaxy pulsed with malevolent energy as the largest fleet in recorded history assembled around the Void Swarm's central stronghold. The mechanical construct stretched across space like a metallic cancer, a sphere the size of Earth's moon, its surface crawling with millions of smaller drone ships that moved like ants protecting their nest. Admiral Jae Sung stood on the bridge of the Soul's Pride, his weathered hands gripping the railing as he watched the impossible sight before them. Ships from 1,000 different worlds surrounded the swarm's core, crystalline Zephyrian vessels that sparkled like diamonds, massive Coronian battlecruisers bristling with weapons, and the flowing energy forms of ethereal combat units. But at the center of it all, looking almost pathetic in comparison, were 12 human fighters, preparing for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. "Sir," Communications Officer Park reported, her voice tight with emotion. "Captain Tae-hyun's strike team is ready for final approach. All alien fleets are in position to provide covering fire." Dr. Yun-hai looked up from her sensor readings, her face pale. "Admiral, the energy readings from that thing are off the charts. The central intelligence inside that construct has processing power equivalent to the combined brains of every living being in the galaxy. How can 12 fighters possibly—" "Because we're not trying to outthink it," Jae Sung interrupted, his eyes fixed on the small formation of human ships. "We're going to outhuman it." Captain Tae-hyun's voice crackled across the fleet communication system, reaching millions of alien ears in dozens of different species. "All ships, this is Ghost. Leader, today we're going to do something that goes against every principle of military strategy ever developed. We're going to fly straight into the heart of that mechanical nightmare and break everything we can find." Elder Vextar's crystalline form flickered with nervous energy aboard his command vessel. "This is madness," he whispered. "That construct's defensive systems destroyed 3 entire battle fleets yesterday. No plan, no backup strategy, no calculated approaches," Tae-hyun continued, his voice growing stronger. "Just good old-fashioned human stubbornness and the absolute refusal to know when we're beaten." The assault began with a sight that defied belief. 12 tiny human fighters, their hulls barely larger than the swarm's smallest drones, dove toward the massive construct while thousands of alien ships opened fire in the greatest coordinated barrage in galactic history. Energy beams, plasma cannons, and quantum torpedoes lit up space like a deadly fireworks display. Lieutenant Yoonji pushed her fighter into a spinning dive that would have killed most alien pilots from the G-forces alone. Defensive systems that could track objects moving at near light speed lost her completely as she wove between their targeting solutions, following flight patterns that existed only in her human instincts. "Hyat-hu!" Sergeant Haewon's voice echoed over the comm as she flew her ship backwards toward the construct's surface, firing her weapons forward while somehow avoiding the mechanical tentacles that lashed out to grab her. "This reminds me of that crazy night in Seoul when I had to drive home backwards in a snowstorm. Pilot Kyung-soo found himself threading his fighter through a maze of defensive drones, each one the size of a building, and armed with enough firepower to level a city. Instead of calculating optimal evasion routes, he simply flew where his gut told him to go, sometimes straight up, sometimes in loops, once even stopping completely just because it felt right. The Void Swarm's response was immediate and terrifying. The construct's surface erupted with weapons that fired streams of pure darkness, trying to intercept the human fighters with targeting solutions calculated to counter every known form of evasive maneuver. But the humans weren't using known forms of anything. "I'm going in," Tae-hyun announced as his fighter pierced the construct's outer shell, diving into mechanical corridors that stretched for kilometers. The interior was a nightmare of moving parts and pulsing energy conduits, all designed to protect the central intelligence at the heart of the facility. Behind him, his squadron mates followed in what could charitably be called a formation. Lieutenant Dongmin flew upside down because it felt lucky. Sergeant Beiho hummed his grandmother's lullabies while weaving between mechanical barriers. Each pilot followed their own human logic, creating a chaotic ballet of destruction as they carved their way deeper into the construct. The central intelligence chamber was vast beyond comprehension, a spherical room filled with processing cores that pulsed with cold mechanical thought. At its center hung the swarm's brain, a crystalline matrix the size of a skyscraper that had orchestrated the death of billions across the galaxy. Captain Tae-hyun's fighter burst into the chamber, its weapons systems locked onto the central core. His targeting computer immediately began calculating the optimal attack pattern, but in a moment of pure human inspiration, he reached over and shut it off completely. "Time to dance," he whispered, and began firing based purely on instinct. The Central Intelligence's response was instantaneous. Processing cores throughout the facility began working overtime, trying to predict Tae-hyun's attack pattern. But there was no pattern, just a human pilot making split-second decisions based on feelings, memories, and intuitions that no computer could process. The mechanical brain that had conquered most of the galaxy found itself facing something it had never encountered: true human unpredictability. Its systems began overloading as it tried to calculate the probability of decisions made not by logic, but by the ineffable complexity of human emotion and instinct. Across the galaxy, something unprecedented happened. Void swarm units that had been systematically consuming star systems simply stopped moving. The mechanical tide that had seemed unstoppable fell silent as their guiding intelligence collapsed under the weight of trying to understand humanity. The war was over. Hours later, as the combined fleets began their journey home, Elder Vextar approached Admiral Jae-sung aboard the Soul's Pride. The ancient crystal being's form had changed. The stress cracks were healing, and light flowed through him with renewed strength. "We had given up hope," Vextar admitted, his voice carrying the weight of eons. "We thought wisdom came from age, from accumulated knowledge, from perfect mathematical calculation. We forgot that sometimes the newest voice in the room has the best solutions." Admiral Jae-sung smiled as Earth appeared in the main view screen, a small blue marble that had somehow saved an entire galaxy. "We humans have a saying: if you can't solve a problem with logic, try hitting it with something completely unexpected." Today we were that something unexpected. The galaxy was saved not by superior technology or ancient wisdom, but by humanity's greatest strength, the ability to be beautifully, effectively, impossibly human. The end.